What's up YouTube? In today's video we're going to be taking a look how to create XML reports using Java. So what you see in front of you right now is the sample report that has been generated, and basically this particular report has been ran through a formatter. That's why it looks nice like this. But let's take a look at certain components that we'll learn in this video. Basically, we'll learn how to create root elements, and that's this test suits. And by the way, this report is in scope of testing for QA. But you can still watch this video if you're looking just for general knowledge of how to create XML reports, because you'll still get it. So we'll understand how to create root elements. We'll understand how to create child elements, how to create or how to append other child elements to child elements. For example, like this test case was appended to test suit, and this is a child element and this is a child element, so you'll understand how to append those. You'll also understand how to add attributes for different child elements like failures or name, and then how to assign values to them. And then I'll also show you how to update those values. For example, this test suite has two test cases that have been reported for it, and this value had to be incremented because first, it's on a case-by-case basis, right? So first time you ran a test for this suite, only this record was added and this value was 1. Then another test was ran and this value had to be incremented. So we'll need a system that will figure out what needs to be incremented, whether the pass value needs to be incremented, whether the failures value needs to be incremented. So there will be logic there as well. Let's take a look. Oh, by the way, at the beginning of this video I said that this report has been ran through a formatting. That's why it looks nice, right? That's why we have some indents here. We have double indents, we have each element is on new line and nicely indented. It looks pretty nice. But when our code actually runs, it's not going to look like this. All of this is basically going to be on a single line. So this is how the report is going to look when we run it. So it is possible for you to run the XML file through a reporter as well, online for sure. But I'll actually take a look and see if Java has some libraries available to parse XML files on the locally on the system and produce this nice looking report. And if the video is already up, there will be a link so for you to check it out. So let's take a look at the reporter class that actually generates this stuff. I'm gonna just kind of walk you through the top level, and then we'll jump into creating this class from scratch. So basically, this is our class reporter. We have a constructor that takes in one argument, and that's a file. Basically, this is going to be the file where you want to save everything. And then we have one public method called update. Update takes multiple arguments, and these arguments can be pretty much anything you want them to be. This will depend on your situation. This is just examples, okay? But I think most of if we look at this in scope of testing, most of the common arguments are going to be suit name, test name, and the result itself. So, but you guys can add whatever you want for the arguments. Now, when we call update, there is very important logic that happens here. Basically, we look if the file exists, and if the file does not exist, then this is where we fall. We execute this snippet, and what do we do here? We create the directories and we create the file itself to make sure we don't run into any errors in this snippet of code when we try to actually save and write to the file that we specified. And this is actually a very important practice, and I urge you guys to definitely do this when you work with files. Check, like, whatever file argument you pass in, check if that file exists. And if it doesn't exist, and later on you're gonna have to save something to that file, make sure that you create it, because otherwise you may run into some exceptions with file not being found. So anyway, enough ranting on that. So here, once we create the files and the directories, basically we call a method to create XML. And that method also takes in the same arguments that we passed in here. But this method is private. Same with this one, it's also private. And it also takes in the arguments that we pass in here. We'll cover this methods later, but basically at the top level, what's happening here, if file does not exist, then we call create new XML, and that's going to do exactly what it says. It's going to create a new XML from scratch, and it's going to put in one record there that we passed in here. With this argument, it's going to create one record. But then later, if you have multiple tests, right, if you run many tests, then this logic here is going to be executed more often than this. So this is where like most of the magic happens, when we actually need to update the existing XML file. And we'll get to that later. Actually, we'll get to it once we start coding. I don't want to like overwhelm you right now. Once we're done with this, once we actually updated the doc, which we save, like everything we do, everything like these two methods do, they return as a doc. And doc is basically the XML DOM. Then we're gonna take this doc and we're gonna use our factories and stuff to actually like stream that data into the file that we specified. So enough of that, let's go ahead and create our class. So just create a new project however you like to create your projects. I'm gonna create a Gradle project. Doesn't really matter, as we are not gonna have any dependencies, so it does not matter whether you use Gradle or Maven or don't use anything. So let's call this XML demo, and I like to do auto imports. For everything else, let's just accept the defaults. So let's see, we're gonna go to source. This is a new project, so we're gonna go to source, we're gonna go to main Java. Inside Java, we're gonna create a new class. We're gonna call this class reporter. And inside reporter, we're gonna create a constructor. And this constructor is gonna be public. Now, as I told you before, this constructor is gonna take one argument, and that's going to be file. This is where we want to save our XML data. Now, at the class level here, we're going to create private variables for the file, because this variable is going to be reused in multiple methods. So let's make this a class variable, but make it private. And then we're going to create another private variable for document builder. And everything we're going to be importing, from javax.xml. Well, pretty much everything. Most of it is going to be imported from javax.xml. So let's call this builder. Now, inside our constructor, we're gonna reference our file, and we're gonna assign the value that we passed in for the file, and then we need to initialize the builder object as well. So here we're gonna call document document builder factory, and we're gonna use new instance and then new document builder. Now that produces an exception, so we'll just add that to the method signature. Now we're gonna create our public void update method that's going to take in those 3 arguments, all of which are strings. So we have suit name, we have test name, and we have test results. Now inside here we need to make sure we create the document object, and this import is actually going to come from orgw3c.dom because this is a DOM object. So, and then we're gonna have our logic. We're gonna say if, actually I think we can just say if file does not exist, then we want to create, remember we want to create our directories for the, basically we passed in a file argument. We need to get the path to that file, and we want to make sure that we create all of the directories. So directory is going to come, it's going to be a parent basically, because you can't call create directories on an actual file with an extension, so we have to make sure we get the parent. And then this produces exception, but let's not worry about the exception yet. We'll wrap it up into a try catch later on. So now that we created the directories, we can actually go ahead and create the file itself, and I'm just gonna say to path. Okay, so we transported the file to path, and then from the path we get the parents here for the directories. All right, cool. So now what we're gonna do is actually create a couple of dummy methods for now. We're gonna create private method that's going to return document from W3C, and we're gonna call this create new XML, and it's gonna take this exact parameters. So I'll just copy paste this. We're not going to return anything just yet. We're just going to copy paste this method one more time, but this one we're going to call, what did I have it named? Update existing XML. All right, so we're going to call this methods here. So both of them return document object, so we need to make sure we save that into our doc object that we have here. We're gonna say doc equals create new XML, and then we pass in the suit name, test name, and oops, rest results. This is actually supposed to be test. Let's change that to test results. All right, and else we're gonna save this to a doc as well, but this one we're gonna call from update existing XML. So now that we're done with this, we can actually wrap on our logic, wrap this logic into a, well, actually, no, let's not do that yet. I'm just going to copy paste. We have to write data to the file. That the data that we got in the doc, we have to write it to a file. So I'm just going to copy paste some of the data, or some of the code here. And basically, all of the imports for that code are going to come from javax.xml. So I'm gonna say okay, and now I'm gonna wrap all this stuff. Basically, the code snippet that we pasted here is gonna write the data that we produced to a file. Don't worry too much about this. This is just gonna be static for across the board for everyone. So let's wrap everything into try catch. And let's see the catch. I'll also just copy and paste catch here. Basically, whatever exceptions you guys are getting from here, we're gonna paste them in here. Well, actually, you know what? I'll just show you how to do that. So let's see, here we have add to catch clause. We can just do it like this. And then we say E, print stack trace. Let's see, it doesn't like something still. Okay, the level, and then usage document sense. Okay, I think that's fine. So what we're gonna do right now to kind of get rid of this red stuff is we're gonna go to build.gradle and we're gonna change the source compatibility in 2 places here. I guess I don't know why do I have this. Yeah, I think I don't need that. I'm just not sure why I had duplicate code in here, but I'm just gonna remove one part of it. So make sure you change the source compatibility. I think you're gonna have 1.5 by default. Make sure you change it to 1.8. And then let's also go to the project structure here and make sure we have 8 selected for the project language level. Okay, accept that. And looks like it fixed this part. Let's see, multiple Java transform configuration is subclass. Do we not need this? Alright, looks like we don't need that. Cool, if you don't need that, we can remove this guy. So now the update method is actually ready. I think we are not going to be making any more changes to the update method. Now all we need to take care is the create new XML. Create new XML and update existing XML. Now that's where the magic is going to happen. So create new XML, let's do that first because that's the easiest one. So in create new XML, we're going to create the document object here to store our DOM changes that we make. And this is where we're going to access the builder object that we created in the constructor. Remember, we got this builder guy, so that's where we're going to use it to build our XML. So we're going to say builder new document. And now we're gonna start creating elements. So first element, this is gonna be the root element. So first element we're gonna call test suits. This is our root element. So we're gonna say doc create element, and this is where we're gonna pass in the name of that element. This is like what we're gonna see in the XML itself for that root element. So we're gonna call it test suits. Now next we are going to create another element, and for readability purposes I'm actually gonna indent a little bit. So this is kind of gonna represent the XML layout, sort of, but it should be easier to read, I think. So we're going to create another element. This is a test suit, not suits, just suit. And again, we're going to call doc to create an element, and this element is going to be called test suite. Now we need to assign some attributes to the test suite. So I'm gonna indent twice here. You don't have to do this indents. I'm just doing them for like visual representation, so it's easier to kind of understand what's happening. But actually, let's do it this way for now. We're gonna reference the test suite element that we created here, and we're gonna say set attribute. We're gonna call this attribute name, and this is gonna be the suite name. Next one, for test suite as well, we're gonna set another attribute, and that's tests. Now we know that this is the very first test that we run because this file did not exist before. This is the very first one that we're creating. So the value for tests, and tests is basically the total value of tests that we have ran for that specific test suite. Okay, so it's gonna be 1. Then we're gonna set another attribute for the failures. So for the failures, this is gonna actually depend on the result, right? The result that we pass in here, it's gonna depend whether we set the failures or whether we set the pass attribute value to 0 or to 1. Okay, so the way we're gonna do that is we're gonna say if test result equals to fail, then we're gonna evaluate that to 1. Otherwise, we're gonna evaluate that to 0. And we're gonna do the same thing for the pass attribute, but we're gonna change the fail to pass. So now we're gonna set this, like, fail attribute is gonna be set to 0 if the test did not fail, but if it failed, it's gonna be set to 1, and same for the pass. All right, so now let's just indent this, I think. Or should I leave it this way? Okay, let's leave it this way for now. All right, so here we have test suite, and now we need to create the test case element. So we're gonna say element test case equals doc create element, and whoops, this element is gonna be test case. Now for our test case, we also gonna set some attributes, and the one that we have is name, and we're just gonna pass in the test name, and then we're gonna pass in the status. Which is basically the test results. What was that? Results. Actually, it should be result. Yeah, let's change that to result. All right, so let's see. So now that we have all of the test attributes done, we need to make sure that we, like, whenever test case fails, I think Jenkins wants you to set this node. Like, I think it wants to do it because in the examples I've seen, that's what people do. So that's what we're gonna do right now. We're gonna create a logic to kind of put this in if the test failed. And basically the way we're gonna do this, we're gonna say if test result equals to fail, then we're gonna create an element, and we're gonna call this failure, and we're gonna reference doc to create a new element, failure. And then I'm gonna set the, oh, actually we're not saying we're appending the failure to the test case. And then we're gonna, all the changes that we made, now we're gonna append them to our DOM. So the first thing we're gonna say is doc append child for the test suits. Then we're gonna say test suits append child test suit. And test suit append child test case. Okay, and then we're going to return the doc. So we're done with this method, the create new XML method. We're done. So this, if we don't have if we do not have an XML file created when we're running a test, and this is integrated into our test reporting, then this will create our file. But if it's going to be called again and we do have a file, we can't process it yet. So now this is where it gets a little bit tricky. So let's go into our update existing XML method. We're gonna do the same thing here. Actually, we're gonna copy the document doc equals, oh, actually no, we're not doing the new one. I'm sorry. Let's create the document object to hold our DOM, and we're gonna reference the builder, but we're not creating a new document. We're actually gonna parse existing one. So we're gonna say parse and then our file. So this is going to parse the existing doc, and we're gonna add this exception to the method signature. And this is, I think, where we need to add this to, so this method can throw this two exceptions. We need to make sure that these two exceptions are part of our catch clause. For some reason it cannot resolve that exception. Why not? IO exception we already process. Why can't it resolve? Oh, I see why. There's a typo, sorry. There we go. So now that we're able to handle all of these exceptions, now we can go and proceed with our update existing XML method. So here we have, now we're going to be using nodes. Whenever we're making changes to the existing XML, now we're referencing like all of the elements that we had here. Now we're going to be referencing the existing ones as nodes. So we're going to say node test suits. We need to pull the root element out of the doc. So we're going to say test suit equals doc get first child. This is going to be the root element that we're going to be appending everything to later. Then let me see what I'm doing here. Okay, so then I'm looking, we need to get the suits. So we're going to say node list suits. This is going to pull all of the suits from, let's see, get elements by tag name. All right. this is going to pull all of the elements matching the string that I'm going to pass in right now, and it's going to store them as node list. And what I'm interested in right now is test suit. So test suit, all of this, guys, basically if you take a look at the XML here, I'm saying, okay, give me all of the test suits that you have. That means this object will be returned, this object will be returned, and this object will be returned. And now we're gonna do a for loop. Basically what we're trying to figure out right now is whether we already have a test suit in the XML file, or do we need to create a new test suit and put it to the DOM and then update the file, or whether we need to pull the existing test suit and make changes to the existing one. Because if we need to create a new one, that's pretty easy, but when we're updating the existing record for the test suite, that's a bit more difficult, because we do have to count like how many tests did we run, so we need to make changes to the existing attributes for that test suite. So that's why we're doing this for loop. Inside this for loop, we're going to say int index equals 0, and while index is less than suit's length, we're gonna run through this loop and we're gonna increment the index. So now we're gonna say node suit, and that we're gonna use the index to pull out the object of the suit. So then we can take a look at like what its name is, what the attributes are, and so on. So we're gonna say suits dot item by index. So now we have a node object for that suit. And here, let's say string existing suit equals suit dot get attribute. So we're trying to pull attribute for specific attribute, and that attribute name, well, is name. And then we need the value of that attribute, so we're gonna say get node value. Here we're gonna say if existing suit equals to the suit name that we passed in, then we know that we already have the record for that test suit in our XML. And we can actually do a sysout print to say that suit already exists, making changes to it. Okay. Let's see what's next. Next we need to create element for test case, because this is a new this is going to be new element, so we're using element class instead of the node class. Remember, if it already exists in the XML file, then we use node. If it doesn't exist, if it's a new new element, then we use the element class. So let's see, test case equals doc create element, and this is going to be test case element. And now we need to set some attributes for this element, and so far the attributes that we have our name. So we're going to pass in test name, and then we're also going to set attribute for the status, and this is going to be test result. All right, so that's good. So now we need to get some information for the attributes. Let me show it to you. So if you go to our report, each test suite has this attributes: failures, 1 or 0, name, pass, and tests. The failures, pass, and tests we will need to update depending on whether the test failed or passed. This one will be just incremented each time we run it. But this two, we will actually have to have some logic to tell whether the test passed, whether it failed, and then we need to update this accordingly. So that's what we're going to be doing now. So here we're going to create node for the test. And we're going to say suit get attributes, get named item tests. This is basically an object that will represent this attribute. Then we're gonna do the same thing for pass and for failures. Let's rename this to pass and failures. So now that we have those objects, we can actually get the value and convert that value to an integer. So I'm gonna say int t for tests, and we're gonna use integer to get the value of the test, get node value, and this guy we just increment by 1 right here. We don't need to do anything else with this guy. However, for the other two, see, for the other two we have pass and we have fail, and then we need to change this to pass and to failures. So same thing, we get the value, the node value for the pass test, for the fail tests. And now we're going to have some logic. We're going to say if test result equals to fail, then we're going to increment the failed count. What does it not like? Oh, I see. Yeah, that's fine. So then we're going to create one element, because remember, if the test fails, we need to make sure we append that failed node for that test. So we're going to create failure equals doc, create element, call it failure, and then we're going to reference our test case object there, and we're going to append child failure to the test case object. And make sure you don't put failures, because we do have failures here as well. You want to make sure you appending this guy and not this guy. Else we're gonna increment passed p-value, right? We're gonna increment this. If the test case did not fail, we're gonna make sure we increment and say that test actually passed. Now we're ready to start bringing all of this data together and putting it back into the DOM. So first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna reference the test. Okay, yeah, so we're gonna reference the test node, and we're gonna actually set the node value to the new value, and this has to be a string. So we're gonna say string value of t for tests, and we're gonna do the same thing for the failures and for the passing tests. So we're going to change this to failures and change this to pass. And then we're going to say suit append child test case. And then we're going to return our doc. So we're going to return the DOM. Everything we did here, we're going to return it. Now, we did a lot of work here just to update the existing suit, because remember we were checking whether we already had that suit. Now we still have one case to cover, and that's if the suit did not already exist in the XML file, meaning this is the very first time we run a test for that suit, so we need to go ahead and create it from scratch. Now this is going to be much easier because it's pretty much going to be the same as to what we had here. And actually, let me just double check what's the difference, because I think everything is going to be pretty much exactly the same. Let's see, so we have element test suit doc. Okay. Yeah, actually it looks like everything is exactly the same, so all we need to do is actually just copy this. Let me just double check to make sure that's what it is. Test suits and test suit. Yeah, so we can just literally just copy this guy with the return and go all the way down here and just paste it in. But we do want to make sure we remove this line. So if we remove that, that should be good. That completes our method, I think. So now let's actually run this and see if it works, because that's what it's going to tell us whether this implementation is correct or not. So we're going to go into Java and we're going to create a main class here. And let's go ahead and create public static void main string args, and we're gonna use our reporter, and let's see, we're gonna say new file, and the file, I'll just save it somewhere in the resources. I'm just gonna copy path for the resources here, and I'm gonna paste that inside and I'm just gonna like append to here. We're gonna say results.xml. So that should be good. We have exceptions. Let's add them to method signature. And then we need to put some data that we want to update. So let's say suit1 suit 1, test 1, say pass. And let's run it and see what happens in the moment of truth. It looks like it ran, and we do have an XML report. Look at that. Let's see, we do have a report. Test suit failures 0, pass 1, tests 1. Okay. Test case, name test 1, status pass. Okay. Now what happens if we run it again? Let's say this is a test 2 in the same suit. Okay, it says suit already exists, making changes to it. So let's see. So we have a second test case inside the first test suit. Now we have tests, 2 tests, both are pass. Now what if we change this to fail? Okay, again, so suit already exists, making changes to it. Now what if we change this to suit 2? Say test 1, make it fail. Alright, let's do test 2, make it pass. Alright, looks like it's running. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna copy this and I'm gonna go ahead and format this real quick. I'm gonna go to, I'm just going online right now to XML formatter to format this real quick, and then I'll paste the results right here to show you kind of the results that we got. So this is what this formatted to. So looks like it works, guys. We have 2 test cases that passed, 1 test case that failed. That's exactly the stats we have here. All right. We have another suit with 1 test case that failed, another 1 test case that passed, and that's exactly the stats that we have here as well. So that's how you create XML reports using Java, guys. And I will have, I think I will have another video where I'll show you how to actually take this implementation of the reporter and integrate it into a framework. And I'm gonna use the Appium framework that we have been building to show that show that integration. So thank you guys for watching, and see you next time. If this video helped you, make sure to like it and subscribe. Take care, guys.